Okay, we're just about ready to call our trim hearing to meeting. Good evening. Welcome to Juvenile Welfare Board's first of two public hearings for the consideration and adoption of the FY22 millage rate and budget. This public hearing is being held in accordance with Chapter 200 of the Florida statutes. Action item 2A on the agenda is the presentation of the proposed FY22 tentative millage rate. Laura Brock, I see you at the podium already. Will you take this agenda item and make the presentation?
Thank you. Good afternoon. So as Chair Ralston indicated, we're here tonight to review the resolutions for the tentative millage and then the second resolution for the budget. So as you are aware, back on July 8th of 21, the board approved the proposed millage rate of 0.8981 and the preliminary budget. Next slide. So this is just giving us a little history or a little reminder of the timeline as we are now. So August 23rd, the property appraisal mailed the trim notice. September 3rd is when the tentative budget was posted on the website, and then we're here today on September 8th for our first public hearing relative to the tentative millage rate in the budget. September 19th will be the date when the trim ad was in the newspaper, and so we've already drafted that, and we're in the process of getting that reviewed and revised, and then you will be back here in this room on September 22nd for the second public hearing, and then that's when the board will adopt the final fiscal 22 millage rate and the final budget as well. October 1, we will begin our new fiscal year, and all of the agencies and the funders will have their budgets. We're in the process of receiving all of those budgets from all the different agencies, reviewing those and trying to get those all processed, so we'll be ready to go come the first of the year. So a little history on the millage rate. As you know, our rate has been at 0.8981, and it hasn't changed since fiscal 13, and we've had discussions about that. This table shows you a little bit on what the out-of-pocket amount would be for an average homeowner and what's happened over the years relative to that from 2016 to 2020. Cumulative, that increase has been about 34%, or about $41,000 on your average home, the taxable value. And then looking at the dollar per paid, the amount that would have been paid to JWB based on the millage rate in existence at the time, we see that that has gone from 109 back in 2016 to today, or last year, 2020, of about $146. So that's just kind of trying to put some of that in perspective. The next slide, again, this is trying to focus on looking at our fund balance. And when I presented this a couple months back, I was just trying to remind you that this presentation is a little different because usually when we look at fund balance, we're looking at it as a percentage of expenditures because that's where your reserves and the board policy, our reserves our policy is to have 2 months of cash flow reserves, and that's based on the operating expenditures, and then another month reserve for expenditures as well. This presentation is a little different because what we're trying to compare is what the budgeted ad valorem revenues are, and that's the solid bar, versus the slated bar, which is on top of it, which is our fund balance. And so going back to fiscal year 16, which would be the far left, the first orange bar, we're seeing that our fund balance was about $17.26 million. And looking at that as a percentage of the ad valorem revenues, it was about 31%. So that's just looking at it in a different perspective. And as this bar chart carries itself from left to right, that percentage is around the same, 31, 31, 30, and then we saw that it went to 36 in fiscal 19. Fiscal 20, we ended the year with 35% of our fund balance as a percentage of ad valorem revenue. Again, another metric or another way to look at it. What we're proposing for fiscal 22 is that number will, will end the year, fiscal 21, that number is jumped. And we've talked about that, and we realize that, and we recognize that. That number will come out at, we're estimating at 44%. Going into fiscal year 22, that number continues to rise at a 50% level. So of course, that's another reason why we're looking at fund balance. We've had a lot of discussions about that. But as far as looking at it relative to the expenditures, which again is the normal way that you would look at it, our numbers are still exceed what our policy is, but they are a little more in line with trying to spend the money and budget for future programming amounts. So we had talked about, next slide, the increase in the property values at 6.6%. The proposed tentative millage rate would require a two-thirds vote. As I indicated, it hasn't changed for several years. If we were to have used the rollback rate, it would have been 0.8500, which would be a 5.66% greater. And then the yield for the 0.8981 would be 85 million. If the maximum amount, if that vote were not to come to fruition, the maximum amount would be the 0.8877, and that's been disclosed in your memo as well. The next slide, so someone would ask us, hey, so we've got an increase in ad valorem revenues that we're budgeting and that we know because property values are going up, and how are we spending that, or how do we intend on spending that additional funds? And so this slide identifies it for you. So we've got a $1.75 million, which we just approved the release for the non-operating and capital RFA. We've got approximately $1 million that will be given to the eligible funded programs, which range anywhere from 1% to 5% for COLA-related items. We've got $2.5 million that we are budgeting for future programming relative to the 0 to 3 initiatives as well. And then we have set aside another $1 million for contingency funds. So this would account for the increase that we're anticipating for our budget. As a result of our budget. So I'll stop there. I'll go to the next slide and ask on the millage rate if we've got any public comments, or I'll turn it back over to Chairwoman Ralston.
Any public comment? No, ma'am. I'm sorry. This opens up an opportunity for board members to have any questions, concerns, or comments before we go to the next step regarding the millage rate. I know we've had this conversation probably about 4 or 5 months leading up to tonight's first trim notice, so I see no lights. Okay. I'd like to recognize that we have, just for the record, we have 8 board members in the room with us, and we have 1 board member on the phone. Commissioner Seal is with us for tonight's vote. So seeing no comments, I will ask Beth Houghton to read the proposed resolution regarding the FY22 tentative millage rate.
Okay, a resolution of the Juvenile Welfare Board of Pinellas County, Florida, adopting the tentative levying of ad valorem taxes for Pinellas County for fiscal year 2022, providing for an effective date. Whereas the Juvenile Welfare Board of Pinellas County, Florida, on September 8, 2021, adopted fiscal year tentative millage rate following a public hearing as required by Florida statute, section 200.065, and whereas the Juvenile Welfare Board of Pinellas County, Florida held a public hearing as required by Florida statute section 200.065, and whereas the gross taxable value for operating purposes not exempt from taxation within Pinellas County has been certified by the county property appraiser to the Juvenile Welfare Board as $97,686,000 $768,308,019. Now therefore be it resolved by the Juvenile Welfare Board of Pinellas County, Florida, that the fiscal year 22 operating millage rate is .8981 mils, which is greater than the rollback rate of .8500 mils by 5.66%. This resolution shall take effect immediately upon its adoption.
I call for a motion to adopt the FY22 tentative millage rate.
So
I
moved.
see, thank you, Chief Milliken.
Second.
Second by Mr. McCurrick. At this point, Sarah Winter will call on each board member for their vote.
Judge Moore? Yes. Mr. McCurrick?
Yes.
Chief Milliken?
Yes.
Mr. Bartlett?
Yes.
Mr. Butler?
Yes.
Dr. Grego?
Yes.
Mrs. Rolston?
Yes.
Mr. Ongst?
Yes.
And Commissioner Seal?
yes,
This motion carries. Aura, back to you for our budget presentation.
Thank you. So as we've discussed, the tentative preliminary budget for fiscal '22 is yielding ad valorem revenues of $85.1 million. We have moved back to a 97% collection rate as we had budgeted a 95 in the previous year. The additional revenues consist of interest and contributions, so the total proposed budget includes revenues of $85,313. That does not include any of the fund balance amounts that are carried over from the prior fiscal year. On the expenditure side, we are looking at our continuation of funds, which includes the COLAs that we had identified, of $74.406 million, which is about a $1 million variance. And as I mentioned in our board meeting, that sounds like a small amount, but it nets to a small amount because we've done a lot, we've added a lot of expansion, we've added a lot of programs, but on the other hand, we have defunded other programs and other programs have gone away. So we've netted that change. The future programming, we have budgeted $2.5 million for that. The RFA, as we just approved, 1.75, and then the contingency, we wanted to leave that again at $1 million. So the proposed total program expenditures would be $79,656,000. This shows you a slide of the different programs. Now that we've switched to the strategic plan and the focus areas, we took a hard look at the budget workbook and how to present all the programs. Instead of putting them in the 4 buckets, we decided to allocate those or show some of the programs that overlap in some buckets. But what we identified here is you can see this in a snapshot. The 76,156 includes the 74 million on the previous slide plus the $1,750,000 capital RFA, and that's included in the community capacity building line. So that included with this is a result of 76,156, and you can see, for those of you who are interested to see where are those dollars going on a program or on a focus area, you can see that the biggest chunk or the biggest portion of that is going to out-of-school time, followed by behavioral health and all the rest of them that are on this particular table. On the administrative side, our salaries makes up the biggest portion of our administration budget, which is at $5.1 million. It's about a $483,000 increase from the previous year. Our FTEs are at 71. The net change in that is 6, and we've talked about the 6 additional positions that we have budgeted in this fiscal year 22 to help us accommodate these additions and these changes. I think we've mentioned in prior meetings that some of those additional positions included someone in HR, on the program side, the financial analyst, and several areas to kind of help us where we've identified where we would need additional help and assistance to accommodate those budget amounts. The total budget for the administrative is 9.164, which is a 7.16% of an administrative rate, and our target for the board is a 10% administrative rate. So we fall below that relative to our budget for next year. And then on our fund balance slide, and I know this is the slide that most people that aren't accountants perhaps kind of get tripped up or maybe don't really understand a lot of the fund balance side. But the way our budget works is we carry over the fund balance from the previous year, and that becomes a part of our revenues for the upcoming year. So we are anticipating $42 million that we're bringing over from the prior year. We've got funds that are identified as non-spendable and assigned, but for the most part, if we don't have much in that area, unlike other governments and other agencies where they've got a lot of money that are set aside for either non-spendable, assigned, or some others. The bulk of our funds falls in that unassigned category. And the unassigned category is the one that we focus on when we're trying to determine where are our excess funds and do we have enough, if we would, set aside to be able to handle cash flow problems or any other anticipated issues like COVID, for example, that hit us this past year. So the budget for fiscal year 22, it's showing a negative $6.871 million. And what that is telling us is on the fund balance side, we are budgeting, dipping into the prior year fund balance of $6.8 million. So we are trying to spend that money. We've got it budgeted. The problem we have is that the lapse money. So at the end of the year, we end up with the big lapse amounts, which is what we did last year as well. So even in looking at last year's budget, we had budgeted using prior year fund balance to the tune of $8.4 million. We're not going to end up in that boat because we've got lapsed funds again this year like we did in the prior year. But that's the approach we've taken. We worked very hard on expanding programs, getting new programs. As Beth had mentioned at a previous board meeting, we're working diligently on getting out an unsolicited RFP, letter of intent, so we can cast the net to get additional programs or areas that might need our funding or assistance. Having said that, I think I will turn it back over to Chair.
Ms. Flynn, do we have
slide.
any requests for public speaker?
None.
None. Then this is an opportunity for board members to ask any questions, concerns, clarification.
I just want to, like to say one thing.
Mr. Bartlett?
It's okay to have money left over. We don't have to spend every dime that comes to this place. And I mean, the bigger you continue to grow, then when you do have a real downturn in the economy for whatever reason, then we're really going to have some problems because we're going to be taking so much to feed the lion that we don't have it. And it just troubles me that property values have done something in the last year and a half that is almost unprecedented, even any times of prosperity earlier in our lifetimes. And they've just gone up in percentage points that's just almost untrackable. And the revenue now from taxes is going to continue to go up. So, I mean, I think, and we mentioned this before, but I think it's just important to keep our minds focused on it might be time to give the taxpayers a break. It's not going to hurt us because we're still going to have the increased revenue from the tax rate and then just operate within that thing. Look at from 2016, we were back operating under $60 million and that's where we are now. It's 5 years later. So, you know, you watch it grow and we're doing good things and I want to continue to do in that pathway, but you got to exercise some constraint. You just can't lurch forward because there's an unlimited amount of money in my back pocket here to be able to pay.
Right.
So that's
Good
Thank you.
observation.
Brian Ongst?
Yeah, I just second that emotion. And obviously I've said this many, many times, so I'm not going to belabor it, but COVID kind of put a halt on my personal desire to see a rollback rate, and certainly not pushing for that tonight. Obviously, we've already voted on the preliminary millage rate, but the unassigned funds continues to grow significantly. Our ability to spend it, even though we've made diligent efforts to spend it with obviously good stewardship and developing good programs to spend it on, like Mr. Bartlett said, we don't have to spend it all, and the fact that we have it is a blessing, and the fact that times are good is a blessing, and this is the time to roll back the rate. So I would like, assuming, God willing, that we're in the same position financially next year, I would really like the staff to develop a strategy for a rolled back rate strategy. At least that's my preference.
Mr. McCurrick?
Would totally agree with everything that was said by both members. The one thing I'd like to see additionally, though, is that we continue to establish and build out the strategy that we have specifically around 0 to 3, as I've been saying over and over, that it's important that we fund those programs. And it's so early in this process that it's difficult to come up with those numbers. But I'm asking the staff to really, as they're looking at just what Brian had requested, that we really take a deep dive into and really this year totally understand what do we really need to do today to impact that specifically in the 0 to 3 learning programs, so that we can begin to really start to work on what future benefits will come from that. And hopefully you will see that by doing that, we'll see a decrease in other programs that may be affected, at level school reading, those types of things, that hopefully if we're doing this correctly and we're getting the impact, that should be coming down, this should be going up, and now we can really take and really understand how to best either roll back the funds or provide additional services that add value to the children and the community.
Judge Moore?
I just wanted to say that I totally agree with everything that has been said, and I know I've said it before in the past, that I think we should look at it, as Mr. Onks has stated. I know we're being cautious because of COVID. Hopefully, we're going to come out of this, and so that we can really look at it to make sure that, one, as Mr. Bartlett's stating, we're just not having money to have money. It is important, as Mr. Bartlett said, to not spend it all, but at the same time, I agree with what's been said. Maybe the taxpayers do deserve a break if it can be done.
As a closing comment, I see that Sarah's frantically putting these minutes in writing, and I, as the board chair and a member of this board of directors, agree as well. And I think it will be important to have our minutes reflect the feelings that are coming from our board members tonight, so that we can reflect in case we are not at this table next year for any reason. I think it's important that these minutes reflect the feelings of COVID putting us in check, but us recognizing the fund balances really push us a little bit to look at that rollback rate. So with that, I will ask Beth Houghton to read the proposed resolution regarding the FY22 tentative budget.
A resolution of the Juvenile Welfare Board of Pinellas County, Florida, adopting the tentative budget for fiscal year 2022 and providing for an effective date. Whereas the Juvenile Welfare Board of Pinellas County, Florida, on September 8, 2021, held a public hearing as required by Florida statute, section 200.065, and whereas the Juvenile Welfare Board of Pinellas County, Florida, set forth the appropriations and revenue estimate for the budget for fiscal year 2022 in the amount of $127,958,246. Now therefore be it resolved by the Juvenile Welfare Board of Pinellas County, Florida, that the fiscal year 2022 tentative budget be adopted, and this resolution shall take effect immediately upon its adoption.
Call for a motion.
So move.
Thank you, Chief Milliken, and I see a second. And at this point, Sarah Winter, would you call for the vote?
Judge Moore? Yes. Mr. McCurrick?
Yes.
Chief Milliken?
Yes.
Mr. Bartlett? Yes. Mr. Butler? That's right. Dr. Grego? Yes. Mrs. Ralston?
Yes.
Mr. Ongst?
Yes.
Commissioner Seal?
Yes, and I also wanted to say that I agreed with all of the comments about talking about next year's millage. Thank you.
That motion passes, and so with that, unless the board members have any further comments, this concludes the first public hearing of the FY22 millage and budget. I'll entertain a motion. Before I entertain the motion, let's make sure everybody has the next date on their calendar. I believe it is September, somebody help me, the 22nd. Let's make sure that's on your calendar so we have a good attendance for that night from our board members. And with that, I will entertain a motion for us to adjourn.
So moved.
So moved?
Second.
Second. This meeting, the first trim meeting is adjourned. Thank you.